Well, I want to welcome everybody to our December Alliance program, and we're lucky enough today to have Lanier Smythe, who's going to talk about Romanesque monasteries in Burgundy outside of Paris. And before we get started with that, I want to let you know that in January we're going to be having a presentation by the group that went to Transylvania, our partner church, last summer, and they will be presenting. And then in February, Ranganath Nayak is going to be presenting his program on creativity and imagination. He was scheduled to do it in November, but wasn't able, I mean, in September, but wasn't able to. So he will be doing that in February. And in March, we'll have John Howe, our church historian, who's going to be presenting. We have yet to.
Oh, I'll share that now, Kathy. It's a talk on portrait statuary in the Boston Public Garden.
Oh, wow. Wonderful. Great. This was a big secret until just we're revealed. And then in April, we have Will Brownsberger, who has volunteered to give us some of his time. And we have yet to come up with a full topic. It might be how did Will get to be interested in politics? It might be something about the state of the state. But for today, I'm going to introduce Lanier Smythe, who will talk about her interest in Romanesque monasteries, and she will be presenting her program. Later, we'll have a chance for questions and answers. But for now, could people mute themselves so we don't have interruptions? Okay, Lanier, you set?
Kathy asked me to give a little bit of information about how I was interested in this topic. Well, I taught medieval art history for 30 or 40 years. I forget how long actually, altogether, quite a long time, and thoroughly familiar with this material. But what I'm talking about today would normally have covered an entire course or in a survey course, 4 or 5 lectures. So I'm trying to condense a lot into a little bit. I always have more material than I can cover when I do these lectures, and I end up either talking too fast for people to understand me, or I only got halfway through and stop in the middle. And that will probably be the case this time around. But I'm hoping to be able to get through a good bit. What brought this to mind was that I spent some time last April no, it was March actually, in Burgundy, going to Romanesque monasteries with 3 friends who also shared an interest in this material. So I've seen these are all most of this is my photographs. You'll see some diagrams and things which are not my photographs, but most of the buildings that are photographs of the buildings are my photographs. So first, let's get started. Romanesque monasteries in Burgundy. First of all, the when, where, and why of this. The when is that it's the 11th and 12th centuries of the Common Era. Now, many people prefer to think of centuries by the number, and that's very easy when you're talking about the 1800s and the 1900s. But when you talk about the 1000s and the 1100s, it's a little bit more difficult. So I will be referring to these periods, unless I give a specific date, as the 11th and 12th centuries. In the same way that we usually talk about our own century right now as the 21st century rather than the 2000s or the 2000s. It's just easier. It seems it rolls off your tongue a little bit more easily. Now, the where for Burgundy is the wine-rich area in central France, as you see on this map. And there are 6 churches that I'm hoping to get to. I may not make it. The first and the last are the major churches that I want to emphasize. And the ones in the middle are less important churches. They're all but one of them are monastery churches, but there's a particular reason I wanted to include the one which is not a monastery church, because it reflects very heavily what could have been found in another monastery church. So to bookend the 2 major buildings that I wanted to show, Cluny, known as Cluny 3, because it's the 3rd church built on that site, and Fontenay. Both of these are abbey churches. So you see here Cluny 3 and Fontenay Abbey. Now, the why is a little bit more complicated. Why is Romanesque monastery architecture important? First of all, it reflects a more settled time. There were a lot of churches that were built during this period, many more than had been built in previous centuries or 2 centuries before. And what is the reason for this? This, of course, leads to interpretation and always more explanations than can be supported. But one reason that can be given is that life was simply more settled than it had been in the immediate preceding centuries. After the collapse of the Roman Empire, there had followed what's sometimes called the Dark Ages, when stability was simply lost. The stability that the Roman Empire had provided was no longer. And there were barbarian invasions. The Vandals and the Goths were running muck all over Europe, and life was very unsettled. But that began to change in the 11th century. There was a more of an agrarian life. It's sometimes called the age of feudalism. If you imagine a pyramid with lots of serfs at the bottom, at the broad base of the pyramid, in the middle, the landowners who are petty nobility, dukes, other nobles, and then at the top there's the king, or at the top of the religious pyramid there's the pope. So feudalism gave a certain stability to life. There was a more organized social structure than there had been in the 500 or 600 years before this time. The Pope and the kings at the top, and everyone else down this pyramid. Now, there's a possibility that there was some millennium thinking at this time, although there are no written sources to support this idea. But the millennium, of course, is 1,000 years. There might have been some thinking that in the year 1000, 1,000 years after Jesus' life, that he would come back again, and there would be a final reckoning, a last judgment. No possibility of setting your life in order and getting ready for your own death if life comes to an end when Jesus comes back to earth. We don't know that this was thought at that time, but we certainly have a lot of visual information in sculpture and manuscripts of the use of the Last Judgment as a scene that's visible in both of those areas. Of course, we know that in the 20th century, the feeling, well, I was going to say in the, leading up to the 1500, there was the feeling that life was going to come to an end. There's a lot of preaching on that subject, and many people fearful that the second coming was very close. And of course, we had something of the same thing in the year 2000, or leading up to the year 2000, with the thought that the internet was going to crash because it hadn't been programmed to go past 1999. We don't know if any of that was thought during that time, although it's tempting to think that there might have been those thoughts. But we do know that not very far into the 11th century, past the year 1000, there was a monk, Raoul Glaubert, who wrote something similar to the ideas I've just been expressing. He said it was as if he said it was as if the world itself was shaken and stripping off its obsolescence, put on everywhere a white church robe. So this white mantle of churches idea is something that permeates the period. There were a great many churches built of the white and beige and gray stone of the local quarries, and that, in a sense, sort of covered the earth. So to look at the first church that we'll start with, Cluny, or Cluny 3, as I said. This was the largest church before St. Peter's. It was extremely long. I'll be giving you the dimensions a little bit later. It could hold up to 1,200 people. And you see in this drawing, which was done in the 18th century, it is a long hallway with a barrel vault overhead. It's stone construction. And we see in the barrel vault transverse arches, which go from one side to the other. And then on the side wall, well, I'll show you that elsewhere, but you can see on the side wall arcades which separate the nave from the aisles. Above that, there's what's called a triforium, 3 arched openings, although it's not really open. One of them is open, but the other 2 are not. And then at the upper level, the 3rd level of the side wall, there are 3 windows per bay. Oh, let's see, I was going to say something about bays. A bay is simply a division of space. And in these buildings, it's marked by the transverse arch, Then you go to the next transverse arch and then down to the ground with the weight from the vaulting being carried down to the ground. That's one bay. So here we could count them out: 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, and then there's another one. There were 11 bays to the nave of the third church at Cluny. Now, perhaps you can understand the building a little bit better here, combining a plan with a model of the church, better than just one view of the inside. Let's imagine how you would experience the building if you had come to it to worship. You would come in from the west. Typical of Christian churches, the church is oriented towards the east. Orient, of course, means east, but what this means is that the high altar is towards the east so that the rising sun can come into the church and illuminate the high altar. And that's the focus of the interior of the church. So if you were entering the church from the west, you would come through between the two towers into a narthex or a foyer area, go down the aisle, and in this case, there are double aisles to each side. This is a huge church, as I said. Then there's what's called a transept, arms on either side of the building. And then beyond that, there's a second transept. This is highly unusual. I can't think of another example where there's a double transept. It's reflective of the fact that Cluny 3 needed to hold so many people in it, and so it's much larger than a normal church, and not only in its length, but in its breadth and in the number of transepts that it has. The transepts have chapels off of them towards the east, and then around the apse is the semicircular area at the end. Around the apse, there's what's called an ambulatory, and off of that are chapels radiating out in a fan. This is altogether, this cluster is called an ambulatory with radiating chapels. Now, you might be asking why I'm showing this only through models and plans. The reason is that the building no longer exists. All that still remains is one of the towers. I didn't actually talk that much about the towers. Go back. You have a large crossing tower and then towers over each arm of the transept, and then a tower over the crossing beyond at the second transept. So a cluster of towers at the east end, and of course the two strong towers at the west end. Oh, let me turn my phone off. Okay, so now, why do we not have more to look at for this church? Well, in a sense, it was a victim of its own success in some ways, I suppose. Cluny was given the opportunity to develop its own order, and it was placed under the authority of the Pope alone. The pattern had been up to that point that a monastery would be placed where someone gave the land, and then whoever gave the land, the local nobleman or a large landowner who gave the land, would typically want to have some influence on what the monastery does or who gets elected abbot. Landowners might want to send one of their younger sons to the monastery with the intention of having him elected abbot, and might put thumb on the scales to make sure that that happened, so that there could be a connection and some control over what the monastery does and what decisions it might make. But by being placed under the authority of the Pope alone, it made the Cluny Church and the other Cluniac churches, which were formed under the influence of Cluny, it made them, in a sense, purer. You could feel more separate from the real world, which is what monks typically wanted to do. They wanted to get away from the real world to an area where they could contemplate and meditate and pray. And if they're having to answer to the local landowner, that's more difficult. So the Cluniac reform resulted in creation of many more churches, many more monasteries, and they brought their own wealth in. So that over time, over several centuries, actually even before several centuries, but very quickly, they began to acquire a great deal of wealth themselves. Lay brothers were doing more of the work than the monks themselves were doing. And they gained power, and power corrupts, and eventually they were thought of as not as pure a form as they had been before. By the 15th century, the abbot of Cluny spent as much time, probably, or maybe more, in his townhouse in Paris. And that townhouse became the Cluny Museum, which many people who go to Paris go to visit, many more than go to the remains of Cluny itself. Now, what happened was that at the time of the French Revolution, monasteries were dissolved. The property was taken over by the state. Many monasteries were abandoned, and Cluny was sold in 1810 and quarried in the course of the 19th century, with the stones being dismantled and sold piece by piece to construct other buildings. So it's frustrating not to be able to see it, but we can go not too far down the road in Burgundy and see a church which is a miniature version of Cluny 3. This is the church at Paray-le-Monial. So in this comparison, I flipped the model of Cluny 3 so that you can see it from the same direction that I've got this photograph of Paray-le-Monial showing you, but you can see the similarity of the two. You can see the strong two-tower arrangement, the let's see, the nave with its clerestory, the transept, the crossing tower, and you can see all of those forms related to what you see here. And inside, you can see the similarity as well. We've got the barrel vault with the transverse arches carrying all the way down to the ground through these complex piers. We've got a 3-story side wall with the arcades separating the nave from the aisles, the triforium up above, and the clerestory above that, the same forms that we saw in the drawing of Cluny. The difference, however, is dramatic. The difference is in size. This shows up better in plan. These two plans are not to the same scale. I couldn't shrink Paray-le-Monial in the program that I had small enough to be comparable in scale to the plan of Cluny that I have. But this plan of Paray-le-Monial on the right would fit into the narthex area of Cluny 3. So that gives you some sense of the difference in size. But I can give you some dimensions, which illustrate it as well. In length, Cluny was over 600 feet long, and Paray-le-Monial is slightly over 200. So it's 1/3 the length of the nave of Cluny. In height, Cluny is not almost 100 feet tall, and Paray-le-Monial is slightly over 70. You also see that there's only a single aisle here rather than the double aisle. There's only a single transept rather than the double transept. There's only one chapel off of the transept, and the ambulatory has only 3 chapels rather than the 5 that you see at Cluny 3. So again, let's walk through it and see what the experience would be like. You could come in through under these 2 strong towers. It's a little bit offset, as you see, but then you would go through the doorway into the main church itself. Well, first of all, the narthex, the entrance area, and the door directly in front of you. The door, it doesn't show here. We're seeing the second door, but the first doorway actually is very similar to the doors of our church, that red, slightly red look, and then the metal straps which hold the pieces of wood of the door together. Inside, already shown a bit of this, but you see it a little bit more clearly in this directly side view with the nave arcades, the triforium and the clerestory above, and the barrel vaulting at the top. Now let's compare the inside and the out so that you see how these are reflected. Coming from the bottom, this is the area of the aisle, and you can see the small windows. There are only 3 bays of this church rather than the 11 at Cluny. So you've got three arched windows, one in each of the bays. Then where you have the triforium on the inside, that reflects the area of the attic over the roof and attic over the side aisle. And then you see the windows of the clerestory up above, and then the springing of the arch for the vaulting would be above that. Let's imagine that you walked all the way through the three bays of the aisle and gotten to the crossing where the transept comes in. And in this photograph, we're looking towards the north. Remember, it's east to west for the direction, so the transept on the left would be toward the north, the one on the south would be towards the right. So imagine going through this door out to the outside. Note while we're inside and outside that you've got one large window above and then three windows below. And of course, the numbers are always important. Three is very important symbolism in Christianity. If you came out that door, you would then be able to walk around the east end of the church with the apse with its windows, circle of window or half circle of windows, the ambulatory with its windows, and then the radiating chapels opening off of the ambulatory. It's such simple massing. Everything in Romanesque architecture is made up of cubes and spheres and cylinders and simple shapes, massive simple shapes. If you had gone in the other direction, not coming out the north transept, but the south transept, you would have ended up in the cloister. And the cloister is always located on the south side, getting the sun with the church itself acting as a windbreak, protecting from winds from the north. Now, I was going to stop here, but because I'm running behind, I think I'm probably not going to stop for questions. We can come back to these at the end if there's any time. But I wanted to give you a chance to ask about Cluniac Reform and these two churches, but I'm going to skip that. Okay, so going on to monasteries and monastic life. This root of both the word monk and monastery is derived from a Greek word which means single or alone. And that was always the intention of monks to live separate from life, to live on their own. And the earliest monks did. They were hermits, particularly towards the east. They were hermits who lived in caves or in single huts by themselves, really making as much of an effort as possible to live away from society, to live on their own in a life of contemplation and prayer. But in the West, monks tended to cluster together and to live communally. And this took off with Benedict and the Benedictine rule in the 6th century. Benedict was a monk who gathered other monks around him at Monte Cassino in Italy and established a rule which had definite rules for life. The most important one probably was the three vows which monks were required to take. A vow of poverty, bringing any possessions that they had with them to the church and giving it over to the church. Poverty, chastity, living a pure life without marriage or intercourse with women, and obedience, absolute obedience to the local abbot. And of course, the abbot obedient to the Pope in the case of Cluniac monasteries. But back to the Benedictine order. In addition to that, there were certain hours of the day that were given over to prayer. There were set hours of the day and night, actually, that one would stop whatever was going on to attend to prayers. And then the division of the rest of the day, which was not given over to prayer, to work. This could be scholarly work or it could be physical work. Now, we're very fortunate to have a plan of a monastery from around the year 800. We think that it was found in St. Gall. It's not that the St. Gall monastery looks like this, but this was a plan which was drawn up probably by a conference of abbots who thought it would be a good idea to put down on paper or on parchment, as it actually is, on parchment, the ideal layout of a monastery. And it's only sort of by accident been preserved because the back side of this plan was used for some other document. And so it was preserved and discovered in the 19th century. And when they realized what it was, everyone was very excited to see how close the ideal of the monastery was followed in other monasteries. And I'll be able to illustrate that later. So I'm going to show it to you turned on its side. because I've got a diagram that names some of the parts, and it's a little bit easier to see that if we are looking at it with the writing going in the right direction for us. So now the church is shown with the altar towards the east or towards the right in this side. North is up in this drawing as we go through it. Now, the monastery is divided into four definite precincts, all around the church. The most important for the monks, of course, is the precinct which includes the church, and you can see here the nave indicated and the aisles to the side. You can also see the towers to the west end of the church, and the main altar towards the east end. It's hard to read this as a transept, but this is a transept to the north and a transept to the south. Off of the transept, well, to the south, there's the cloister. And as I mentioned, this would be to the south and be the warmest area, getting the sunlight. And if summertime and you want it to be out of the sun, there's a covered passageway all the way around that. And of course, the church would block the northern winds. There's an access from the transept into the dormitory so that the monks can come into the church at night without having to go out of doors for their prayers. You can see the indication of the cots for the monks. Then they also had their own latrine, as you see here, and bathhouse as separate buildings in this model plan. And then following around on the next side, we have the refectory with the tables and benches indicated for the seating for the monks, and their kitchen as a separate building, also so that if it caught fire, one could hope that it would not set other buildings on fire. And then the fourth side of the cloister taken up by the storage area with indication of barrels for beer and wine. Sorry, I'm hitting the wrong button here. So I should have been showing this one because it shows you a little closer. I forgot that I didn't need to keep on the one with the markers. Okay, the second area distinct area that I want to point out is the area to the north. And this is the area that communicates more with the outside world. You can see that immediately towards the west, approaching the church from the west, there was a hostel where travelers could stay if they were caught on the road and needed a place to spend the night. The next big building is the guest house, where, as you can see here, lodging for guests, the schoolmaster, and visiting monks. And it had its own latrine and two kitchens here, one for the guest house and another kitchen, presumably for the hostel. Then continuing around, there's the school which the schoolmaster oversaw apparently. And as I mentioned, monasteries were places of learning, and they taught not only monks, but the young men of the neighborhood, with the hope probably that many of them would become monks, and those who didn't would be able to work for their families and be educated to be able to write and keep records. Then beyond that, we have the abbot's house with his own access to the northern transept so that he too can go in and out for prayers without having to go to the outside. The two remaining areas show up in the larger plan again. One of them is the area that deals with health and death. And here we have the infirmary, which you can see, with its own cloister. That's attended by the physician's quarters, where work could be done to help to heal figures, and an herb garden. You don't see the labeling here, but this is the bloodletting room, and there's a kitchen and a bath for this section as well. They also had their own chapel, so that they did not bring contamination to the rest of the monastery. Then continuing on, the next thing that we see is mirroring that shape, a novitiate. This is where the monks who've not yet taken their final vows would live, again around a cloister, again with their own latrine, bathhouse, and their own chapel, bath and kitchen on this side, the latrine on this side, and their own chapel. And then if they didn't make it out of the infirmary alive, there's a cemetery here for final burial. And in order that no space is wasted, there's an orchard planted in the precinct of the cemetery. Oops. The fourth area relates to the self-sufficiency of the monastery. And here you have a garden, a vegetable garden with the gardener's house, caretaker's house with the geese and chicken. And the fact that there's a gardener's house and a caretaker's house suggests that this might not have been overseen by monks, but by lay brothers or some who've not taken their final vows. The other buildings show us the barn and granary, artisans' workshops, bakery, mills, mortars, brewery, coopers, kiln, and then getting into the barns, the bulls and the horses and the cows and the female horses, I suppose, the pigs, the goats, and the sheep. And then this area labeled for the servants, I'm not sure whether that's supposed to be servants who came with people who are staying in the hostel, but they're not staying in as elevated location there, or whether these are lay brothers who are acting as servants to the monastery. This is an issue later on, but I don't know if that was an issue this early. Perhaps the model shows it better than the plan, but here you can see quite clearly the shape of the church with its transept. And of course, you can see very clearly the cross shape and the symbolism of that for Christian churches. You see the two towers at the entrance. You can see the cloister, the dormitory, the refectory, the storage area, the two cloisters and areas of the infirmary and the novitiate, the cemetery, and then the buildings of the functioning farm of the monastery. It did function as a farm and as a city with the hope to be self-sustaining. And looking at these two compared, this is the plan of what has been excavated and put together, because of course it doesn't exist anymore, but the plan of Cluny 3 and comparing it to the ideal plan, you can see that there's so many areas that are similar. The cloister to the south, the parts of Cluny 2 were retained, and so the dormitory doesn't connect quite as closely to the transept, but down a hall you could get to the dormitory, which is the second story over the scriptorium in this case. Here's the refectory, the kitchen, the storage area, another cloister for other outbuildings, the latrines out here, the infirmary, the cemetery, all located in approximately the same relationship to the main church that we found in the ideal plan at St. Gall. Again, I'm not going to reserve time here for questions, but if we have time at the end, please do ask me questions about monastic life, and possibly I can answer them. Okay, the next thing is the Church of St. Lazarus at Autun. Now, this is the only one which is not a monastery church, but I wanted to show it to you for a couple of reasons. Looking at it inside, you can see quite clearly how much it relates to what we've been looking at. This is Autun on the left and Paray-le-Monial, that miniature church of Cluny that I showed you. The barrel vault, the 3 stories, in this case only 1 window at the top level rather than 3, but nave arcades separating the aisles from the center space. And you also notice the stacking up of these pilasters, which are flattened columns applied to the supports which go up to the transverse arches. They're very similar in these two buildings. So it is very strongly influenced by Cluny in its architecture, and we think probably so in its sculpture. Unfortunately, very little of the sculpture of Cluny survived, but we know that it did have more sculpture than we have examples of. Only a few capitals have survived. But looking at Cluny, looking at Autun, perhaps we have a sense of what the sculpture might have been like. And we certainly see it in other Cluniac monasteries as well. This is the entrance to the church, its west entrance, where you see up in the tympanum, which is a semicircular area over the entrance doorway, you see a scene of the Last Judgment. This is Jesus, and in the center, and in the corners of this tympanum, you have angels who are trumpeting the second coming of Jesus, and he's sitting in judgment with heaven on one side, on the right hand of Jesus, and hell on his left hand. He's also flanked by Mary on one side, And probably it's hard to tell here, but usually this is area reserved for John the Baptist, the two figures who are most likely to be shown next to him. Now, this is three-dimensional sculpture in a, sorry, not three, it's relief sculpture, but some parts of it are very flattened, as you can see, almost closer to a manuscript illumination than to relief sculpture, projecting out fully from its background. Looking with more detail at the left hand as we look at it, but the right hand of Jesus to the scene of heaven. Over here we have St. Peter holding a key, ready to unlock the gate of heaven as this structure to the side. And there's some angels who are helping to assist some of the souls of the dead into heaven by pushing them through the windows. Other figures are gathered looking adoringly towards Jesus with the hope that they will be given a place in heaven. Down below, you see the souls of the dead visualized as little nude figures rising up from their tombs, stepping out of their tombs and being assisted by angels or shepherds. And of course, a shepherd is always a symbol for Jesus. So these are ones who are probably going to heaven. And on the other side, the hell side, we have this visualized by, first of all, the jaws of hell over here at the edge. And then the way of visualizing the actual judgment taking place, we have a hand holding a pair of scales. Lost my. Oh, here it is. A pair of scales with two pans in it to measure something. This is measuring the good and the bad of a soul. In this side, we have the good of the soul. The figure is damaged, so you can't see it completely, but maybe you can see a curved arm with the two arms together in a prayerful position with the hands together as prayer. This side is clearly winning, and the angel is ready to take this soul and take him over to heaven, one imagines. In the other pan, we have the other pan of the scales. We have the evil deeds of the person or the evilness of the person visualized by this monster face and this sort of ghoulish figure. And you see that there are other ghoulish figures trying to weigh it down, to give it a little help by pulling the arm down on this side, but not succeeding. This side is weighing more. Furthering the idea of this being the hell side, we've got a serpent, visualizes the serpent of the Garden of Eden, and other figures who are being pulled up into the jaws of hell. Down below, we see other figures coming up from their graves, and these on the hell side have ghoulish faces themselves, indicating that these are the ones who were the evil doers during their lives. And I love this image of this taloned hands of some monster dragging this figure out, consigning it to hell. Looking back to the overall picture, we have the arches which are overhead, purely decorative in the first arch, but the vine motif is always a symbol for Jesus, the bread and the wine, the vine motif, and of course very appropriate for Burgundy. Beyond that, we have the zodiac, relating all of this to life on earth, with the signs of the zodiac and the labors of the individual months. To go through, I probably won't be able to name all the zodiac signs, but what you have here is Aquarius. It's a figure pouring water out of a vessel. Pisces with two fish. Aries with the sheep. Taurus with a bull. Gemini with two figures. Cancer coming after Gemini. Leo right here. Oh, I keep losing my Leo. Next, the next one is Virgo. Libra, Justice with a pair of scales again, and Scorpio, and Scorpio here, and Sagittarius. We're missing Capricorn, but the photograph doesn't show the entire zodiac scene. And then the labors of the months alternate with the zodiac signs. I can't pick all of these out, and it's not enough detail here, but surrounding the month of April, what we have is figures who look as if they might be pruning the vines of the grapevines. They're definitely using saws to do some work in the garden or in the fields. Now, we have with this work one of the rare instances of ownership. Gisela Bertus made this, is inscribed in the lintel stone beneath this scene, indicating that someone named Gisela Bertus was responsible, and we think that he was the sculptor. We can't know for certain, but we think that he was, and there's a uniformity to the sculpture in this church, which indicates that one person had a great deal to do with it, either himself or by training others who worked under his supervision. One of the most beautiful pieces from this church, it's now in a museum, is this figure of Eve plucking an apple, or what looks more like a pomegranate if you look at the ends of it, from the tree of the knowledge of good and evil, and whispering to Adam, trying to tempt him to join her in eating this fruit, this forbidden fruit. The other place where we have sculpture, the Eve scene is lintel stone over the entrance from the north transept, which opened onto a large market area. The other place where we have sculpture is in the capitals of the columns, or the pilasters, actually. Many of them are foliated or showing leaves, as you see here, and that would be close to the classical columns of the Corinthian and composite columns, which used acanthus leaf form to form the decoration for those capitals. Here it's very stylized, much more than it was in, well, it's stylized in Greek and Roman examples as well, but stylized in a different way. But many of the ones in Autun and probably at Cluny as well, and many other churches, show scenes from the Bible. And I'll go through a few of these. This is the story of the Nativity, with the angel Gabriel coming to Mary to announce the birth of Jesus. Here we have the birth of Jesus himself, Joseph around the corner, over here to the left, Mary stretched out in bed, a midwife who is bathing Jesus in what looks like a barrel, and he certainly looks a little bit older than a baby, but the sense of babies does not show up much in the early Middle Ages. That comes in later in the Renaissance, when babies get shown as babies. Here we have the three wise men bringing their gifts to Mary and the Christ child. And here we have them fleeing to Egypt to escape the wrath of Herod. Joseph leading the donkey with Mary and the Christ child, seated very tentatively on the donkey. This is the art of presentation, not representation. The sculptor is not trying to show us the way they might really have looked, but trying to present to us the figure of the Christ child and Mary. The sources for much of this art probably came, well, this art is sometimes referred to as the Bible of the poor. Most people were illiterate, of course, during this time, and would not have been encouraged to read the Bible even if they could read. But they knew these stories from being read them, and then they could follow the stories along by looking at the sculpture in the capitals of the church. They would also have known them probably from tableaus in front of the church, just like the nativity pageant that we have in our own church. And there were mystery plays, players who would travel from town to town, putting on whole stories that related to the Bible stories, the mysteries or the miracles of the Bible. There are also other capitals which show more ghoulish scenes, similar to what we saw in the hell scene. This might be a biblical scene. This might be the devil tempting Jesus, offering him to the whole world if he will just give up his role as the Son of God, but follow him as a leader of the devil. And another biblical scene, this one of the three Marys who come to tend the body of Jesus in the tomb and see him walking there, and one of the Marys reaches to touch the hem of his garment, and he says, "No, don't touch me. I've not yet been to my Father." So again, one of the biblical stories that people would know from being read it, but not from reading it themselves. This scene, back to the idea of the souls falling to hell rather than going with St. Peter and his key to heaven, a ghoulish monster waiting to welcome him, and the deceased having a ghoulish face and the wings shed as he falls. Now, the other reason I wanted to talk about Autun is that there are important Roman remains in Autun. It was definitely an important Roman city, and there was a wall all the way around it with two gates which survive. This is one of the gates from the Roman period with double arches, probably horse-drawn carriages going in and out, and the separate arches. And then to the side, it doesn't show here because there's another building behind it, but there were smaller arches which were for pedestrians. You notice that it's the arcades, which we've been looking at in the separation between the nave and the aisles, and then above that, another row, another level of arches similar to what we've seen in the Triforium and the clerestory areas. This is another one of the major documents from the Roman period, this large theater that survives in Autun. Now, there are many things to say about this connection with Roman architecture. And I want to spend, got 8 minutes left, spend a little bit of time on this and then, yes, goodness, oh well. Okay, the Romanesque period did not invent the arch. The arch is a major part of Romanesque architecture, but it's not invented during the Roman period. The Greeks had the arch, but they considered it ugly, and they preferred the post and lintel system, which you see here, with using upright post and horizontal lintels. In that case, the weight comes directly down, and it's much easier structurally than the arch is. If you imagine an arch and extend it along a horizontal line, you get the barrel vault that we've been looking at in so many of the buildings that we've looked at before. Now, the disadvantage, there are many advantages, but many disadvantages also to the arch. One is that it's much more complex than the post and lintel system. Stones have to be cut in wedges, and you can't complete the arch, and you can't, it's not complete until the final keystone is put into place. And until then, you have to support it with centering, wooden centering underneath it. It's very heavy. Stone arches are extremely heavy, and so they're pushing out, as this diagram illustrates. They're pushing downward, have to have enough strength to support it downward, but they're also pushing outward, and you've got to compensate for that in some way. The advantages are that you can span a much greater space than you can with wooden post and lintel, and you can't span it with a large space with lintel stone, nor can you find beams of wood that are large enough to span a very great space. And another great advantage is that the stone is more likely to be fireproof, although we know from Notre Dame that stone cathedrals are not totally fireproof. But back to solving this problem of the outward and downward motion. One way to do it is to have a series of arcades, and then each arch is pressing towards the one next to it, and that absorbs the outward and downward thrust. Another way is to have an extremely heavy wall, too hard to push down by the weight of the stone vaulting above. Another way is through buttressing, which is what is demonstrated in this diagram. A buttress at right angles to the direction of the barrel vault, go back to the barrel vault, would help to support some of the outward and downward pressure. But there's another way, which I haven't pointed out before, although it's been visible in some of the buildings that we've looked at, and that's the use of the pointed arch. The pointed arch does more to deflect the pressure outward and downward than the round arch does. And this might lead you to say, but why are these buildings not considered Gothic then? The difference can be seen when we look at the comparison between a Romanesque interior and a Gothic. This is actually the Church of Autun, the east end of it. The altar end was built during the Gothic period and demonstrates Gothic forms. Here what you have is the pointed arch, the flying buttress, which meets the thin wall area between the windows and carries the outward and downward thrust through the flying buttresses out to the outside. It's got ribbed vaulting up in the upper area, which diminishes the weight of the barrel vaulting and forces it more. This is just infill rather than the real structure. It becomes a skeleton structure and it dissolves the wall into glass rather than the heavy wall that you see in the Romanesque churches. It leads to a different aesthetic. The Gothic church is completely solid, it's rational, it's heavy wall, it's stability. It speaks to the desire for stability in life at this time, following the chaos of the previous centuries. But in the Gothic period, they're wanting to create a mystery, to devote something more to the afterlife and to the unknown. Okay, now to look at a few churches. I have 4 minutes left to look at a few churches which are in the same area and reflect, or one way or the other, by being similar or different, what we have seen in the buildings that we've looked at, which strongly relate to Cluny. This is the Church of Saint Philibert in Tournus. Here you see two strong towers, part of the wall, and the pointed tower, which is part of the church. Then going inside, you see how very different this is from what we've been looking at before. Here we have barrel vaults, which are at right angles. So the comparison first, the barrel vault going in the direction towards the east. Here we have barrel vaults, a series of them, one per bay, which are perpendicular to the direction of the building. It's still a barrel vault, but it's turned direct. And so this is like a series of arcades. You don't need as much support to the side, and so we don't have as much support to the side. We have very simple columns and no capitals. All of this is very different from Cluny. Looking into the aisles, we see a different sort of vaulting used there. It's what's called groin vaulting. I'm just going to talk about this very quickly. Groin vaulting, if you imagine two barrel vaults at right angles to each other, it allows you to bring in light or openings on 4 sides rather than just on 2 sides, to bring it all up to a much greater height. Okay, to go to another church, the Church of Vézelay, which was a monastery church. The outside of it, similar things to what we've seen before, but coming inside, another west entrance sculptural doorway with the Pentecost here. This is the scene of Jesus' appearance after his resurrection, appearing to the disciples and giving them the gift of tongues so that they can go out and spread the gospel to other communities. Again, you have the zodiac and the labors of the month up above. Go through that quickly. Looking into the church, we see how very different this is from Cluny. It's got groin vaulting in the nave itself. It's got these striped transverse arches. That was the same, was also true of Saint Philibert, but I forgot to mention it. So it looks completely different from what we've been looking at before. It's only 2 stories, no triforium, clearly in reaction against Cluny, or at least not following Cluny in its structural form. I'm going to go, okay, finally get to Fontenay. Fontenay was a definite reaction to Cluny. It was not built with a large monastery. It has a monastery, but much smaller than Cluny. Looking at it here, you see that it doesn't have the 2 towers that we're accustomed to. It doesn't want to be seen from a distance. It doesn't want to have bells to call people to worship here. It's just for the monks themselves. It's set in a very beautiful rural area. And this is the case for all the Cistercian monasteries. A different order formed, the Cistercian reform, to counteract some of the abuses of what had become the Cluniac development. It's leading toward greater austerity, greater simplicity, more self-sufficiency. Coming inside, it's very difficult to understand how dark it is inside because the camera, of course, makes things look lighter. But you can maybe see some of the similarities and differences here. Let's see, I went to, and I'm sorry, just going to keep on going. You see that there's only the barrel vaulting and then the nave arcades. There's very little light coming in through the nave, through the aisles, the small windows set inside barrel vaults, which direct the light just into that bay of the aisle. Looking back here, you see the use of light towards the east, and that's almost the only light you sense when you're inside the interior. As you get closer to the altar, you see that two sets of three windows, and again, the symbolism of the three windows. If you had turned towards the, maybe you all want me to stop. I do want to, just one brief thing. In the cloister, you see that the capitals are very plain, and in the church itself, you see that the capitals are very plain. If I can just read an apology that Saint Bernard of Clairvaux wrote to one of his correspondents, complaining about the immoderate length and superfluous breadth of the Cluniac churches. I had a couple of phrases I wanted to read from this, but I'll try to reduce this as much as possible. He complains particularly about this is the dormitory. He complains particularly about the sculpture, the deformity, the ridiculous monsters, the unclean apes, fierce figures, many bodies seen under a single head, many heads on a single body. In short, so many and marvelous of the variety of shapes on every hand that we are more tempted to read in the marble than in our books, and spend the whole day in wondering on these things rather than in meditating the word of God. For God's sake, if men are not ashamed of these follies, why at least do they not shrink from the expense? So that's what St. Bernard of Clairvaux was aiming for with the Cistercian reform of the Cluniac development. So if anybody wants to stay on and ask me any questions, you can unmute yourselves and do that now. I'm sorry, I am not able to tell a short story.
Oh, Lanier, that was absolutely wonderful. I
Well,
mean,
thank you, Kathy.
I've been in a fair number of churches, and I do not have your architectural eye to really appreciate what you've been able to so clearly show us with your photographs, your close-ups, and thank you so much for the research you did and for every minute of it. It was wonderful. And if there are people who have questions, either if you want to raise your hand.
Lanier, thank you so much. Absolutely fascinating. Two questions. How long did it take to build Cluny, and what was the likely population of the area?
Yeah, of the area. I don't know the
Well,
population
I guess of Cluny itself.
live there. It was started in 1088, and I think it was dedicated in 1120 or 1130. I don't remember which one, but fairly quickly. And the number that I got for the number of people, that it was built to house 1,200 monks. So that's why it's so large.
Wow.
And I mean, I also read, within 50 years, there were 300 Cistercian monasteries. I mean, this was just spreading everywhere. So Bernard of Clairvaux wrote that letter that I read you from in 1124, and by the end of the 12th century, there were 300 Cistercian monasteries. So people were just flocking to these monasteries. It's just amazing. I don't know what the population that supported this was, but that gives you some idea of how many single men there were who were flocking and single women into convents. Nicole?
Yes, I have two things to mention, which is there are stairs to get in because the buildings are sinking.
Yes.
That's number one. And number two, which is very surprising to us. And number two, an example, a bigger example of what you said, which is not in Burgundy, in the Loire Valley, is the Fontevraud Abbey.
Yes.
And then Eleanor of Aquitaine was the head of both men and women convent. And if you're a monastery, if you want, you can go and stay at their hotel right now. It's very, very nice. So everything that Lanier explained, you will see in steroid at the Abbey of Fontevraud. And then the other thing is the Cathedral of Autun is important for a historical fact, which is that the one of the very important figure of the French Revolution was the head, not was made head of Uta of the cathedral because he could not be anything else, although he was uh, a noble. And that's the man who betrayed Napoleon at Waterloo. So that's pretty interesting to know. Autun is a very interesting place in itself. It's got other historical things, that facts dating to the revolution and linked by the revolution. So I'm just adding my 2 cents, but I loved what you presented.
Oh,
And
well, thank you.
not just that, but the way you did will allow people who are visiting other um, churches of the same era throughout France and understand exactly what's going on, because there are no books really that do just what you just did. So I'm really grateful for your explanation. Thank you very, very much.
Well, thank you. I was hoping that people would feel that they could apply this to other churches as well, that you would learn enough from this and retain enough to be able to see it. And one thing I forgot to mention, our church is oriented towards the east, which, although it means that it's not oriented towards the street, you come in and then turn, and that I'm sure was intentional. It may have been the size of a lot, but probably intentional in order to have the light towards the east coming
All
through.
churches are
Our,
supposed to be
yes,
doing
they
that.
don't all manage it, but
No,
Yeah.
but it's a replication of all the other temples. The most of the cathedrals were based on Roman temples. Under Notre Dame, there's a temple of Venus.
yes, right. And the Greeks, particularly, as I said, used the light as a part, important part of it. And I nodded when you talked about the stairs, but I didn't realize you were talking about going down. I'm not sure what buildings you're talking about, but there is, if it's in a city, there's the phenomenon of the level of the street being elevated over time as it's surfaced. So sometimes that's the reason that the buildings seem to
No,
be
but
sunk, but they haven't actually sunk. It's the ground has come up, the street has come up, but I don't know which building you're talking about. You may know
yes,
where it's actually sunk. Any other questions?
Richard,
Can I
Richard,
ask?
Oh, Richard had, yes.
Yeah, I wonder to what extent they knew about the acoustic
Oh, yes.
possibility, because the Gregorian chants and
That's one
but
of the things I
also,
left out.
yeah, the voice, the single voice seemed to be a little less decipherable than the beautiful music that expands through the.
Yeah, that was one of the things that I meant to. I actually had a page of a chant book with the notes shown to
Mhm.
make that point. The acoustics of these churches are really amazing for the sound. Maybe not understanding, but for the sound itself. But with the Cistercian churches, which are plainer, which are simpler, they eliminated a lot of the ornamentation in the Gregorian chant. They wanted only one voice, or not two voices, not splitting it up or anything. They wanted it as simple as possible, so it would possibly be more understandable.
Mm-hmm.
John?
Lanier, I'm curious about your career. You taught 35 or 40 years. You taught this subject.
Well, I forget. I started in 66.
Where have you taught over time? And have you published much in this area?
I taught at the University of Tennessee for about 10 years, and then we moved up here, and I taught at Suffolk for 5 years, and then I got into architecture, and then I came back to teaching in 91, and then I retired in 2005. So if you put all that together, I
Yeah.
never have actually uh, calculated, and actually I never published anything. When I came here, the head of the English department told me that that the University of Tennessee had done me a real disservice because they gave me tenure as soon as I got my PhD, because they had so few women tenured at that point that they were embarrassed, and they felt they could justify it. And so I never had an incentive to publish anything. And with, a career, and I mean, I never considered a career, with a job
Yeah.
and 3 children to deal with, and active social life. I never published anything. I did deliver papers, and they were always medieval papers, but I never
Yeah.
published anything.
Yeah.
So that's my apologia. Mark?
One other thing. Did you happen to see they at the Gund Hall at the Harvard School of Design? They had.
No, I
Oh,
did not.
I get in the last day. There was
I
a recreation of
Yes.
the apse at Cluny, and it was really a magnificent experience.
I found out about it only after it was over,
Yeah.
and I would have if this had been all about Cluny. Conant is the major adherent to Cluny. He's the one who worked out a mathematical formula for how it was constructed in its all of its forms, and spearheaded all the excavations. He was a professor at Harvard. Some of his work has been discounted now, but it was extremely important for recognizing the significance of Cluny, because at the time he was doing that, it was just the tower that I showed you, and a little bit left. Oh, some of the other buildings which had been rebuilt in the some of the dormitory areas which had been built in the 18th century, they were still there, but the church itself was basically gone.
Mark?
Um, yeah, what little I've known about this subject before this lecture, I got from reading Pillars of the Earth by Ken Follett.
I read that too. I thought it was worth reading.
Well, I was going to ask if you thought it was accurate. For those who don't know, it's about someone in 11th century Britain building a major cathedral, and he actually travels to France to look at the churches there in part of the book.
I thought much of the discussion of the actual construction was fairly accurate from what we know. The thing that I faulted it was they would talk about where they lived going down a long corridor. The houses they lived in did not have long corridors at that point. They were more castles, more fortresses, or smaller buildings. So that was my fault with it. But I was very interested in the book. And he also had a book, a short book after the destruction of, or after the fire at Notre Dame, which I think I listened to that one. Any other questions? I'm sorry that I couldn't tell this in a shorter time period. Parrish, did you have your hand up earlier?
Oh, yeah. It's not really a question. It's just like an enthusiasm. Thank you so much. And I got to visit Fontenay and Vézelay and share with Lanier medieval fascination, but not your depth of scholarship. Just wonderful. Thank you. But I was just going to make this comment, like if anybody's near Paris, go to Fontenay. I just found walking around the entire complex amazing. Excuse me, there's something in my throat. The Cistercians were such engineers. I mean, they were bringing water into that entire complex by this underground, system of, springs and extraordinary, over like 2 miles, just a tiny, tiny decline so that the fountains would go and the water would come. And as you were asking about the acoustics, astounding. But just I had such admiration for the entire mindset of engineering for that monastery. Just a great visit, everybody.
Thank you.
I agree with everything, Parrish, that you said. And the other thing is the enormity of it. I mean, you hear the word monastery and you don't think about all the aspects of who's all living there and where the infirmary is and where the school is, where the cemetery is, and then the gardens. And that whole complex was just amazing. And I think we don't think that in the 11th century there was that really advanced civilization to build and to live and to anyway. Are there any other questions, Nicole?
The gardens near the infirmary were for the plants to cure people.
The
But
herb garden.
if you want herbarium, but if you want to see some right now in Paris, right around the remnants of the Cluny museum in Paris, which is part of the leftover of the Cluny monastery that was in Paris. There's a museum there, but they have rebuilt the herbarium with some rather interesting explanations. So in Burgundy, it's extraordinary, and every single other places where they have still standing or rebuilt those monasteries or part of them, you will be amazed at the kind of plants they were growing that now people are, and in France, they're using phytotherapy using such plants, which we don't have in our pharmacopoeia in this country. But that part is also very amazing. And I have another question. Was there any mention when you visited Autun of the uh, of the Napoleonic Wars? Or
Well, I wasn't looking for that.
okay.
There was another museum we didn't go to. We were able to find one museum which had been closed, but there was a new opening, and we were able to find that's where that figure of Eve was located. But there was another museum that we didn't go to. So sorry, missed that one. So thank you all for
Mm.
sticking
Thank
with us
you.
for another
Thank you.
15 minutes.
Thank
Allowing
you,
me to
Lanier.
Fabulous, Lanier.
Wonderful.
Fabulous.
Thank you.
Thanks.
And I
Thank you
wish
all.
everybody a safe winter holiday and travels and enjoyment of all the things we have at First Church. And I hope to see you in January when Michael Griffin and the group that went to Transylvania, our partner church, Deshvalva, are going to be presenting a whole other civilization and wonderful partner experience. And so the Alliance has programs the second Thursday of every month at 11 o'clock. And if you have trouble with finding the Zooms, send me a note or any of us. Thank you very much, Lanier, and we do
Thank you
appreciate
all.
Yeah, thank you,
Thanks
Lanier.
for
Thank
sticking
you.
with